checking to see if we're on. Hi everyone. I'm Mark with AMI-Quebec. I'm the program coordinator here. I'm joined by Sarah and Nima. They're both with McGill University. They're residents in the psychiatry or psychology program. Psychiatry program. Just wanted to double check. Okay, Sarah was with us last time. We did social media, but tonight we're doing another hot topic on marijuana and mental illness. Obviously, huge topic because last week Justin Trudeau legalized marijuana across Canada, one of the first countries on the planet to legalize it. It's very much a buzz topic. Everyone's thinking about it. Everyone's talking about it. So this is going to be a live interactive video, obviously on Facebook. We encourage you online to participate. We have one of our colleagues here who's going to be online answering questions and passing questions on from you to us or comments as well. If you have any issues with the audio or the video, let us know as well. We'll try to adjust those as we go. And we'll try to stop throughout the night. We're going to be here from 7, maybe till 9 o'clock Eastern. We'll see how late we'll go, and we'll try to take questions and comments throughout. And then at the end of the workshop, I will tell you a little bit more about AMI-Quebec, how you can evaluate us, a few of our services, and what we have coming up later this season in the next few weeks. So to get started, I think there's probably 3 words we're going to be using interchangeably tonight: marijuana, cannabis, and pot. There's probably other terms as well, but I know you both did a little bit of research. You're going to be talking a bit about the DSM-5. It might be best to explain what the DSM-5 is to layman's out there.
Sure, thanks, Mark. So we're really excited to be here because, I mean, it is a topic that we need to be addressing. We need to know about what a plant does and also what we kind of feel or interact with that plant. So one of the things that you're asking is, what is the DSM? The DSM is this very big manual that's has a whole bunch of diagnoses, and it basically looked at different illnesses and categorized them depending on their presence within the population. And it's very helpful to understand a little bit of how mental illness can be understood. It has its flaws, of course. Not everything is always agreed upon depending on who you talk to, and I'm sure depending on which psychiatrist you see or which psychologist you see, you might have different diagnoses. It can be very confusing, but it still gives us a little bit of an understanding of what is an addiction problem and how we can understand addiction, intoxication, withdrawal, how we can understand different elements of each illnesses. And so we usually use it in terms of kind of framework, and we'll probably be talking a little bit about when do we know that our use is problematic and when do we need to get help, which is something that can be a bit, can be a bit difficult. I don't know if you have anything to add, Nima. Well, so one of the things before we go though into DSM is to understand, you said 3 big words, cannabis, weed, or maybe not even weed, okay, cannabis, pot, and marijuana. Most of you probably know marijuana as the street name Mary Jane, has a whole bunch of different ways. Then you also have to understand that cannabis is basically the plant from which the marijuana is taken and collected. And in order to know what this plant does, you have to understand how it's being bred. And how it's being bred, but also how it's affecting like our body. So we'll go a little bit about on the different elements of what is this actual plant and what does it actually do to our body. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about maybe the endocannabinoid system, Nima.
Sure. So in the cannabis plant, there's various different strains that affect the body, but the 2 main ones are THC and CBD. And these are short forms for very long scientific words. And THC is what's commonly known as what will get you that high effect, whereas CBD is commonly known as what will get you the body high effect. So those are the 2 main distinctions between those, and they work on different cannabinoid receptors in the body and in the brain. And the important thing that I really emphasize through the research is that the THC content over the years, how it's being significantly increased. I believe from 1995 to now, it's gone up around from 4% to up to 30% in some plants. So it's a very different than it was 20 years ago. And the THC and the CBD will give you different properties and different highs.
I think it's so important to know this because people say, oh, well, I'm smoking something. But what are you smoking? Are you smoking skunk, or K2, which are different things? So if you're smoking skunk, which is basically a very, very, very high THC level, it can go up to 40% in certain places, you're going to have a completely different high than if you go and smoke K2 or spice, which are synthetic products, or that you're going to smoke something that has more cannabinoid CBD that's present. And that's very, very important because we'll be talking a little bit about this. If you have questions at any point also, you can interrupt us. But this is going to be important because we need to understand how our body reacts to everything and which are the elements and components from it. And so now there's a lot of research of like which ones can maybe be more helpful for body pains, which one can be more helpful for different like medical purposes. And so once we kind of go into these different elements, then we can understand. And then there's also a certain risk. With a higher THC, there's a lower CBD, and that can lead to certain elements. And we'll talk about a little bit about the risk that can be ensued in that. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay. So these are kind of basics elements that is very, very important to know because then it'll give us an understanding. Then what we have to understand is also how is your body also reacting to the cannabis within you? Our body actually creates endocannabinoids, so endogenous, so within ourselves, and that actually alleviates. It works a little bit in a way that's actually quite interesting, which is like that it gives us a little bit of this kind of you could call it a bit of like pain relieving element, and it will allow you to feel a bit more at ease. And so a lot of people use cannabis for that kind of relaxing, euphoric element where you feel kind of better, you are a bit more relaxed, less anxious. And so now they're starting to try to see what are the other properties can actually be from those elements. And you have that euphoric element to it. So in our body, we produce these elements that are there. And then when you smoke cannabis in different forms, then you have these things.
And just to note that the endocannabinoid structure is different and changes as you go through puberty and as you age. So it's not something that's static throughout your life. It's something that is changing as you go through puberty, through early adolescence, and then as you get older.
So basics. But again, it's very important because we're talking about not just one thing, we're talking about many different things. And the way that we can have these elements in our body needs to be understood. Then the second point that's really, really important also is to understand different risks. And we talk about risk because now there's the whole talk, and it's very exciting. Now it's legal to possess. But just kind of like it's legal to have alcohol, it's also legal to be able to smoke cigarettes. Is this for me? Is it something that can be actually something that can be harmful? Is it something that can actually be maybe detrimental? And so there's a whole bunch of studies that had been done on which population might be at risk. Do you know?
Well, I think you'll get into it later, but one of the articles you sent me was about driving cars. Is this something for later?
We can talk about it now.
I mean, why not? Let's just put it up. You sent me an article about teenagers and driving while high, and that I found that really interesting because it talks about just kind of basic driving and high level risk driving and the results they saw from high kids trying to drive.
Yes, I'm really happy you're bringing this up. It's actually, so the question is like, okay, so now it's legal, but now what? Can you smoke and can you drive? Can you smoke and go to school? Can you smoke and go to your work? Like how is this going to actually like play into account? It's the same thing after prohibition was lifted from alcohol, the same effect that we're having. And so they did all these, they're starting to do all these studies. And the study you're talking about is one that we can probably post that was from the Canadian Medical Association Journal. And they looked at specifically how young adults, so a bit older than teenagers, were affected by driving and by cannabis use. One of the things that we see when people, and I'm talking about intoxication, that means that's when someone's literally had smoked directly and is using their car. What happens is that they end up coming into this point where their attention is skewed. Similar to when you're drunk in a sense, or similar to when you've haven't slept all night. Those are kind of similar things. So your attention is skewed, and you also have difficulty knowing when you have to make a decision or not. That means that when you're going for a drive, then you can have actually like certain effects of not making the right decisions. And so they saw clearly that there's an impact that can be very correlated between how much you're smoking and the fact that you are getting into accidents. So that's definitely a high risk population about what's going to happen. And I was very interested in seeing how are you going to test this?
You mean police officers? Yeah, I don't know. And I mean, not to go, it's not really off topic. Is it 18? Is that the age now for 18 or 19?
To legally possess? I believe it's 18, but it would have to be fact checked.
So it's going to depend on our Prime Minister Legault now is going to basically maybe change to 21. That's not confirmed, but so far it's 18 years old. You can possess up to 30 grams within yourself on the street, but you can go up to a lot more at home. So walking you can possess. But in terms of actually driving, they're starting this very, very strict policy. And it's not in place yet, but basically officers who think that you are intoxicated, that means that, well, we know a little bit of what intoxication means, but let's talk about intoxication. Right. What does it look like when you're high?
It's in the DSM, right? This is DSM stuff. Yeah. I think it has to do with impaired judgment, right? Don't put me on the spot here.
Okay, so I won't put you on the spot. It's funny because I think about the kids coming with their ice drops to school. I don't know if you had experienced this in high school, but you had the eye drops. The red eyes is one of the main one that people do. The dry mouth, the tachycardia, so the high frequency of your heart rate. These are things that if an officer is arresting you for some kind of offense that you've done, or speeding or anything, because your judgment can be impaired, then they can decide whether or not to do a salivary test and test how much nanograms of marijuana you might have within your saliva. This is not yet in Quebec. It's starting to come in Ontario, but it's something that they're very strict about. The offenses are going to be very high. So driving and smoking right now is illegal. You cannot do it. If there is some kind of suspicion, they can ask you to even give a urine sample. So they can ask you to provide that to them. So these are going to be questions that we need to be thinking. But yeah, the DSM, so the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, gives us very clear indication of what an intoxication is. This is an acute, very specific event, usually depending on how you consume marijuana, either that you smoke it, that you eat it, or that you have even a patch now, because you can have patches. These are going to have different elements of how long it's going to be. Usually when you smoke it, it's about could be from a 15 to a few hours length. Yeah.
And just to add, in that study, what I found really interesting was that the time that they studied was up to 5 hours that there was which is a pretty long time. I don't think people realize, and the effect was worse if they mixed alcohol with the cannabis. And that's also something to think about, because people might know their alcohol driving tolerance, but adding in another factor might off what they're used to.
Yeah, and that basically like the more I mean, I don't think a lot of kids will be parallel parking, but the more complicated the driving, the less good they were at it. I mean, it's an obvious thing, but I think it's going to be something that comes up a lot more, especially because it's now suddenly legal. And like you said, like I think a lot of things are changing very quickly. I noticed in certain municipalities, I mean, we're in the Montreal area, but certain municipalities have already put in codes in terms of places, like etc., where they can smoke. And yeah, I think a lot of laws are just, it's going to be very like growing pains, a whole era, a few years of where things are just going to be figured out on the fly. I'm going to talk about professional sports later on because they're actually going to be adjusting as well. So yeah, it's a really a brave new world. We're the first country to do this, and I know America and a lot of the world is really, staring at us right now.
That's a great point. Do not bring marijuana across the border. That's one of the first recommendations that we are highlighting. That won't fly. You might be flying, but that won't fly. But no, seriously, it's going to be something that's very, very interesting to see what happens within the next few years, because there's going to be a lot of changes, a lot of back and forth. Are people who have been criminalized because of their marijuana possession, are they going to be decriminalize? Is there going to be like this kind of conversations we have? That's all going to be forward, and it's very interesting to be living in this moment where we're seeing it. There's the prohibition that was lifted, if we call it that. So I think that's going to be something that's very important. That's why these conversations, the conversation that we can have here, that we can have in other places, are really important, is because we need to be bringing a bit of this kind of awareness of like, hey, let's have an understanding of what this plant does to us, and let's have an understanding of how we can make informed consent. And informed consent means that I know what I can know the most I can. So I think those are very important elements. We're talking about different things, and people are starting to put very specific recommendations about use. And this organization in Ontario started putting together recommendations across the population that's being kind of brought in by the government. And it's trying to say how you can use cannabis in a way that's safe. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit. Oh.
So someone's asking if we'll be addressing the pros and cons of using cannabis for depression. Okay, so we have a question. Yeah, of course. Pros and cons of using cannabis for depression. Either of you?
So the first thing I would ask is what kind of cannabis they're using and what's the ratio of the THC to CBD. I don't think medically any cannabis has been approved for depression. And if you're depressed, I highly suggest you speak to a physician. But I know there's been subjective reports that haven't been studied that they seem to think that it helps, and I haven't actually read any studies that suggest that it does. And I think it's so different what strains people are using that it's hard to do studies on the population because everyone's using different THC to CBD strains. And later we'll talk a bit about the risks of the ratios if you have a higher THC to CBD ratio.
I think that's, again, we're coming back to the basic. What are you using, and what are you using for? Depression is vague. Even depression itself is something that's huge. So we'd have to know also what kind of depression we're talking about. Is it something that has more anxious symptoms, or something that has more insomnia symptoms, or is it something that is mostly the anhedonia, the lack of energy? And so I think that's very, very important, because cannabis can be something within certain moderation that has been kind of shown in mostly case reports, not big studies, because it's been really hard to do case studies, but basically how certain levels, a very low amount, can actually relieve a bit of the anxious symptoms. That's something that's mostly, again, brought by people's experiences, also with most CBD increases strain. So that's something that's kind of positive in terms of the effects that can have. Again, low dose of CBD, like a high content. The thing that happens though is that there is what we call tolerance. And I think that's something that we need to be talking about because we're talking about substances. Tolerance is basically the fact that you start at a dose and you smoke or you use and you need a higher dose, and the higher dose, then the higher you need. And so that's where it's problematic. And what we see a lot in substances is that our body gets habituated to something, and we start having cravings for other things. And so we have to monitor this. And that's one of the things that we have to know is that, okay, so I'm using for my anxious symptoms, but is this actually leading me to need more and more? And so we talk about the cons as well. The cons can be the fact that if you start using more, then you can have these negative effects that could be that it actually creates a bit more anxiety. And that's something that we do see a lot. And the necessity to use it to sleep. These are all things that unfortunately we do see. And because of the difficulty with depression, it can be something that's difficult. Another point that's also very important is that the the use that you're having is also going to affect what we call amotivational syndrome. It's a syndrome that was studied in the 60s, where they saw that people who used a lot of marijuana ended up having these elements where they just have had more apathy. It's usually a syndrome that appears when someone is smoking a lot, constantly, like every day, high amount, and for a long period of time. Eventually, what's going to happen is there's going to be less desire to go forward in terms of education or work or creative projects. And so what you see is that the apathy that you have can also lead to difficulty engaging in activities. So that can also be one of the cons in terms of how much. So it's all about the question of, in a sense, and I mean, it sounds a bit boring to say it, but moderation and knowing, again, what are the effects that you're hoping to get versus what are the side effects that you are. But I think before we go on, I mean, maybe there's other questions. Nothing so far. I hope that answers your question. But I think one of the things that we really need to be addressing is what are the certain risk population? Again, I go back to this because that's really one of the other like take-home message. The first take-home message is know your CBD versus THC content in the strain you're using. The other element that I want to like make sure that we get through today is am I at risk of something more dangerous? So we talked about already driving. So am I putting myself in a dangerous situation? Who else is population at risk?
Oh, I remember reading these. It was reading about pregnant women. Yeah. I don't remember. Please refresh.
So the SOGC, the Society of Obstetrics and Gynecologists of Canada, they actually recommend that no use of cannabis during pregnancy. And there's studies that show that cannabis use leads to lower weights. We don't know exactly what other causes it can have, but we do know the THC and the CBD do cross the placenta so that the fetus is having active exposure to these contents. And then also something that I read, unlike alcohol, where people can, during breastfeeding, where people can usually, when people can usually have a glass pump and then throw out the breast milk and they'll be fine. The cannabis actually stays in the fat deposits, so that'll be in your bloodstream for around 30 days. So you can't just smoke and then pump out the breast milk, and the CBD won't, and the THC, they won't be gone. They'll be in your fat deposits. So the current guidelines say no cannabis use during pregnancy and breastfeeding.
And I believe there was also research on these children born of women who use marijuana, like the effects on them health wise.
It was, I think there was only a few studies, and it showed that perhaps they have lower neuropsychological testing or performance on the center testing, but there's also like an overwhelming amount of other research that needs to be done in order to have more specific uh, diagnoses and more specific results. I think the understanding now is because we know that these things do interact with the fetus and they do bring low birth rate, and um, we do know that in adolescence they can cause other major problems and they can cause decreases in the neuropsychological testing. Then that can extrapolate to the children as well.
We have to remember that um, it's not only the the drug itself or the substance itself. Sometimes what happens is just smoking. So what you do end up getting is hypoxia, which is basically a reduced amount of oxygen to the baby. That's super detrimental. That means that you're not giving your baby enough oxygen to be able to breathe. It's putting a mask on for about 9 months. It can be very, very at a moment where you're basically growing. So these are very important things that we need to be carefully assessing, and there's going to be more research about it. But basically, yeah, at-risk population. We talked about driving. We talked about pregnancy and breastfeeding, and there's also different things. Do you remember? So we talked a little bit about adolescents. Yeah, adolescent population. Again, we're saying is that there's a lot of stuff that's not known. It was very interesting actually. Cannabis been used for like thousands of years. It dates back like the first like text is in Chinese medicine 2000 BC, like it's like lots of time ago, and they were using it. And again, the plant is very, very different, and it even had certain strains that they were preferring depending on what we're seeing now is that they're high content THC strands. And so what that does is that it changes a little bit the um, neurodevelopment, so the development of your brain when you're having a very, very, very specific moment in time, your adolescence. That's very important to have a really full growth. So your brain continues to develop till you're about 25, around. And what we see is that the population that smokes the most, and I'm saying smoking, I know there's edibles, I know there's different ways of using, but that smoke the most are that population between the 14 and the 25. We're talking about 3% of the population that uses. Then again, it's the strand you're using, but also the amount of using. So what we see is that if you start using very, very low at a very young age, you're affecting your development of your brain in a specific way, and we don't know exactly what are the effects. There's correlation between using at a low age with a high amount with difficulty connecting your different hemispheres. So basically, at this age, you're myelin, like you're putting myelin on your brain, so you're creating the tracks, and so basically you have difficulty connecting those two hemispheres. We also see that there are certain parts of the brain that have less capacity to process, and teenagers who use have what we talk about in neuropsych testing. It's basically they looked at the cognition of kids, their capacity to perform on tests, and that actually was seen to be lower in the time that they're using. What's interesting though is that it doesn't keep on. The test that you're going to do if you're intoxicated might be normalized within 30 days if you stop using. So I think that's also something that we need to know, is that these changes are reversible if you decide to stop using. I don't know if you want to add anything or.
I wanted to add, I believe it was in the reading as well. It talked about the different uses, like you mentioned, smoking versus edibles, like how they affect your body differently. I believe it said that the worst risk came from smoking because it affected your lungs.
Yeah. Do you want to say something?
So just like smoking cigarettes, smoking it brings a big risk to your lungs. You're exposed to all of the same or similar toxins. So there's increased risk of having lung cancers. And I think that is why if you want to consume, then they suggest methods that are not direct smoking, so vaping, edibles, oils.
It's really funny you're bringing this up because when you read the law, edibles, do you think they're allowed or no? Are they legal? So yeah, they're illegal so far. The worries was that, well, it makes no sense. Basically, all the recommendation in terms of medical like world says edible should be better for you. But the thing that is also present is that people don't know how to use edibles. So that's the question. And what they saw in different places is that people who places where edibles were more available led to higher emergency visits because people go into intoxication. So you're basically having a cookie, you eat the cookie, you get the munchies. Oh, we didn't talk about munchies yet. Okay, well, munchies is basically a side effect that you have where you have an increase of desire to eat. And so you have the munchies, that is an effect that cannabis can produce. You eat another cookie. You don't feel the effect yet because also it takes about half an hour to 45 minutes. So people start consuming more and more without knowing actually that you should just limit yourself to half a cookie. It's a very big problem in a lot of different places. And so that's why I think they're doing it progressively, is because slowly people are going to be able to know. Same thing as kind of with alcohol. You learn where your limits are. And so same thing with cannabis. We need to learn where limits are. So I thought that was kind of a little bit interesting to see that edibles were not allowed yet.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about CBD oils. I know it's kind of off topic, but it's really interesting because this is kind of breaking stuff in the sports world. They're starting to have a little bit of discussions in the NHL, the National Hockey League. Uh, this is interesting. It's the only of the four major sports leagues in North America. It's the only one where marijuana usage is not fined. I didn't know that till today, actually. They allow their players to use it. They just kind of give them a scolding. The other leagues, they get fined immediately. But there are, there is wide usage in other leagues off the record. But they do get fined when they get caught. But there's a lot of research into CBD, and I can actually speak from personal experience for dealing with pain. And CBD oils, you said is one component of marijuana. I think it could be something that could be widely used going forward. It just really has to be explored, and the NHL said they're open to talking about it.
So I think Tony's.
If you want to try to lump this into there, maybe.
We've got a question.
So this is the person's comment. Is a caught the tail end of an advertising on the radio of a study being conducted on the impact of cannabis on mental health in California. By any chance, are you aware of this study in Montreal? And the second part of that question is, are you aware if NUHC, more specifically if the psychiatric department, is conducting any studies on this?
So we're having a comment on
Cannabis and mental health.
the effect of cannabis on mental health.
Specifically Montreal, if there's any studies going on, or if the psychiatric department is doing such.
That's a very good question. I wish McGill was a lead in cannabis studies. I really do. Unfortunately, our department is I don't think is doing any studies that I know of. I can look it up. I can also try to see if there is some studies in Montreal. So far, the elements that are the most present in terms of cannabis and mental health are not so positive in terms of what we have. That's a little bit of where the research has been. But again, I think we're going to see more and more questions. And again, mental health is huge because if we talk about a specific sample of things, we're talking about psychosis, and psychosis actually has a lot of studies. And so I think that's why I'd like more clarification of what kind of mental health you'd be kind of interested in knowing. because that's another thing that I think we're going to be covering in not too long, because I think this is one of the like points that I have to make is the risk population, and psychosis is something that we have to cover. But to go back to our yeah, the CBD oil. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to put the two questions together, but I think that's it's. I think the point that Mark was trying to say is we're seeing that the transformation of how we relate to cannabis. And from, I think we were just talking about it right before going on air, is this idea that it's always been considered a gateway drug. For the longest time, people who used were kind of seen as people who are going to become delinquents, use other substances, go into the juvenile system, and all these things. And I think there's certain elements to know that there is a link between your usage and dependency and just your recreational use. What's coming more and more is also, which is what you're bringing, is how can we also use in different ways. That means that how can we extract what we want from that plant. And humans are really good about this. Like, we love to extract a lot of different things from a lot of different plants and try to make as many use as possible. Like, it's, I mean, my favorite thing was to learn that aspirin came from the willow tree, right? So yeah. So like, we learn a lot from plants all the time, and a lot of our medicine is actually is generated from, like, metformin that's used in diabetes is actually from a flower. Like, it's all these things that we don't talk about because, well, there's big pharmaceutical companies that have taken that plant, extracted it, and made a patent out of it, and then we are disconnected from it. So I feel like bringing this conversation is all about, like, how do we relate to plants that are in our environment, and what are the elements that we can actually subtract from. And oil is one of them, because it allows the more toxic element of smoking, of the inhalation, of the hypoxia that I was mentioning a bit earlier, and allows to go straight to the actual component that we want, which is CBD. So what we're seeing more and more is that CBD is becoming used. If you're just joining in, CBD, cannabinoid, is a very interesting part of the cannabis that has been seen to not have any psychomimetic. I'm using big words here. Like, psychomimetic, that is basically creating psychiatric symptoms. So we're talking about paranoia, hallucinations, anxiety, depression, these elements. So this is psychomimetic. This is mostly linked to the THC. What CBD does, on the contrary, is go more directly in the pain regulating elements. So that gives it more close. Yeah. Sorry, I move a lot and I forget to put my microphone close to my mouth. Oh, can we finish just the... Okay, perfect. So for the CBD oil, what's been kind of brought into is that, and these are experimental questions, a lot of it. There was interesting studies on using it directly in vivo cells for cancer treatment. And that's really just kind of, so in vivo, that means within directly the Petri dish. So you have the dish, you have your cells, you put oil, you see how it reacts, and they saw that basically the cancer cell reduced. So that's something that's kind of interesting, and people are hoping that it's going to go somewhere else. How does it work? Oh, I don't know. I don't think they know either. I think that's going to be kind of progressing. In terms of pain, and I think that's one of the big things, we've kind of started seeing that there's really, really poor pain management in Canada, in the States, that's led to an extremely, extremely difficult time for patients, and also created the whole crisis that we're seeing, which is the
opioid.
So the opioid crisis. So now they're trying to see if we can change the way we see pain management to increase cannabinoid use within earlier steps, but it still remains a third line treatment. So that's something that we're going to be starting to see. Did you have anything else, Nima?
With regards to the, I think it's been studied mostly in chronic cancer patients who experience pain from that. And I think one of the benefits that they saw was it did reduce pain, but it also allowed for more autonomy for the cancer patients, and they really they like that compared to the opioids.
I think we had a question.
We got a couple questions. First one is, can you discuss cannabis and PTSD? Is it a treatment option? What does the recent research say, and where can we get more information on this topic? And then another person has asked, which is a pretty quick question, I think, is does the use of cannabis create an addiction?
Okay, let's start with the first one.
The first one, and then
Cannabis and PTSD. Um,
I'm very happy you're bringing this up. I didn't catch your name.
that is from Lindsay.
Lindsay, thanks for bringing PTSD. I think it's something that's was very, very hopeful. People were very hopeful. They were like, maybe this can be helpful. It'll decrease anxiety. It'll make it more manageable. But actually, like so far, what we saw is a worsening of symptoms of PTSD. That means that patients who've been tested. This is also again in environmental setting that is experiments. And so the promise of what we were hoping, and some studies are contradicting, but most of them say that PTSD and cannabis are not the best regime. What happens in PTSD is that there's usually, well, there is a trigger that has happened that's created a traumatic event, and the traumatic event has repercuted the way we understand and focus onto the world. What happens with the cannabis use is that the distortion can become more present, there's more paranoia, patients become more anxious, and so that can lead into a whole bunch of ways. Is that going to change depending on how and which strains they start using for their studies? It's hopeful. So is it maybe something that could be useful is that eventually with more CBD high strain, we're going to see actually less paranoia and going to be used for maybe some of the insomnia symptoms, some of the dissociation symptoms that can be present in PTSD. Short answer, I hope that's helpful. And then for the next question, yeah, is... So does the use of cannabis create an actual addiction? Great question again. I'm very happy you guys are asking questions. Keeps us motivated to go for another, I don't know, a couple of, well, almost another hour. Yeah, Nima, I'll give it to you for now.
So I think the question is framed in a yes and no fashion, but I don't think it has a yes and no answer. I think when we look at addiction to any substance, there's really three main criteria. It's dependence, so dependence on the substance, and then what does that mean? So it means that you're, well, usually it means you're seeking it out, and it's probably causing you harmful events in your life that you're ignoring. So regardless of these harmful events, you're still trying to seek out the substance. And there's increased use. I think, Sarah, you talked about tolerance. So because of the tolerance, you have increased use. And the third main criteria is, I'm blanking here. It's yes, I think so. Withdrawal when you take away the substance, or cravings. Yeah, and that also goes in with the dependence. So does cannabis use cause addiction? In some people, it does. I think the latest figure is 9% of individuals report cannabis use disorder. So it actually affects their daily lives, and it limits their functioning.
Yeah, I think you. Oh,
We have another question.
another question.
So when you get through this one's a pretty loaded question. So
I'm getting nervous now. So the addiction part, I think, is something that is worth mentioning. If you have, so one of the things that we talk about a lot in mental health is where do you come from and where are you living? And these really allow us to see how a person is in the world. It's not just a substance. You have to take who is receiving the substance and then where they're receiving the substance. And so these different elements are very important. There is what we saw in cannabis use, a certain percentage of people who do end up developing a disorder of use that we call them. We call them substance use disorder, so that's the new kind of DSM diagnosis. So in terms of cannabis, what happens is that you are also kind of predisposed in certain ways to certain elements of things. And we're coming back to I love it. I love that this is always coming back to the race population, but it's really, really important. And I want to like make sure that you get the idea of where I'm going with this. Basically is if someone in your family has some kind of substance use disorder, that means if someone in your family that you know is addicted to any sorts of substances. We're talking about alcohol, we're talking about cocaine, we're talking about cannabis, we're talking about any substances that are present, you're more likely at risk of also developing a substance use disorder. So that's really important because that's going to play a lot. So if you see people around you in your close family, we're talking your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, if they're more, if they've developed that kind, then maybe you also have a propensity that's higher than normal population to have this. The second thing is your environment. Where are you using? Are all your friends using all the time? Is your environment that you're living very stressful and you need to find some way to like basically decompress in certain ways or fall asleep or decrease your anxiety or just also have a good time? What is it that's around? And is your environment also facilitating more use than you would actually do it? Because then that will build up your tolerance is going to increase, you're going to become more interested in having it. If you don't have it, you might have also withdrawal symptoms, and that's very important. Some people don't know that there's withdrawal symptoms to cannabis use. So we talked about intoxication. We've talked a little bit about addiction. So let's talk a little bit about withdrawal symptoms, and then I'll come back to the question that someone has. But basically, withdrawal symptoms can be a lot of different things. Some of it is irritability, right? So maybe you don't realize that you're in withdrawal because the symptom is irritability. Well, I had a bad day, I'm irritable. Well, actually, the fact that you stopped using might lead to the fact that you're more irritable. It could also be certain other elements, which is feeling more tired, having chills, not being able to focus. So these are all very kind of, anybody can have them if they're thinking they're getting a cold or something. So I think it's very important to start noticing if you stop using how you're feeling. Anyways, I'm going to stop talking because we do have a question.
Ready?
Yeah.
So this question is from Roberta. It says, what to do with a 24-year-old son? Started marijuana at age 16. He is now homeless, has psychosis from it. His brother and sister hate him. Dad says he needs exercise.
Okay. I'll try to
There's a lot to address.
yeah. I'll try to repeat that verbatim. This is from Roberta, and it's a 24-year-old son who started using marijuana at age 16. He's homeless and psychosis, and infighting with the family. Father recommending exercise. Was there more to the? Okay.
Well, we were prepared for a loaded question, but we're never prepared for these stories. And I don't think, Roberta, either. Thank you for addressing us in this forum. And I hope also that you're going to be connecting with AMI-Quebec in not too long because,
Let me just. I'll talk about AMI-Quebec for a minute. Probably a good time to put that in. So, AMI-Quebec, we're a nonprofit here in Montreal. We're available. You can come in person, go on our website, which is amiquebec.org, or you can call us or go on our Facebook page and contact us. But give us a call. Talk to us. We're open Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. We have a lot of workshops. We have one-on-one counseling. We have support groups on Monday nights at the Jewish General Hospital. We have all kinds of things. We have podcasts. We have events like this. And we help people, and we mainly deal with the caregivers of people with mental illness. And almost all of our services are free. And if we don't know how to help you, for the most part, we can guide you to other services that can help you, to CLSCs, to psychologists, psychiatrists, other community organizations as well that are like us. And Yeah, we're here to help basically. So I don't expect you guys to be able to answer every question, but you know, if you have direct questions like that in your own personal life, give us a call and we'll try to help you further.
Um, and we're here, so we do want to address the fact that you've come to this platform and asked about this very, very sensitive topic. And I'm happy you're bringing it up because what we're seeing in, again, high content THC strains of cannabis lead to a higher risk of psychosis. So, for those who don't know what psychosis is, it's when people start having hallucination. They can be visual, they can be auditory. In cannabis, you also feel tactile hallucination. So that means that you feel like somebody's touching you or that there's bugs crawling. And you also start having certain delusions. That means you start thinking that stories that are in maybe happening are actually real and become a lot of time what we say is a lot of paranoia around it. And we know that that can be either transient, so that means you can have the acute intoxication and have the psychosis element. So you have it only while you're intoxicated. So we had said between 15 minutes to 5 hours around, and then that goes away. What happens though is that sometimes there's persistent psychosis that can be present, and so they can go from um, basically after the intoxication and last for days after 2 months. And then what we see also is that there's actually 3 to 5 time folds of schizophrenia developing in users that use high THC content cannabis starting at a low age. So that's the kind of statistics we have to just kind of tell you a little bit of probably maybe some of the elements that have been present in your son. What happens with psychosis is that it's extremely, extremely hard to live with. There's been trying to like do different virtual reality games to give us the idea of what psychosis means, and I tried one. It's terrifying. It really is terrifying. You don't know what reality is. You lose contact with what's going on. You alienate yourself because you don't know who's on your side or not. You're constantly in a sense of stress, and a lot of people who go through these experiences have a high propensity to end up in the street. That's something that we see a lot, a lot, a lot. And so that's something that's very hard for family to grapple because it's like, well, you know, how can I be more involved in that kind of process? I think one of the things that's important is the fact that you're still having these questions for your son, you're still having this desire to know more, to get more information, to reach out to other places, to get more kind of like hands-on experiences. The fact that he's alienated himself from his family is difficult, from his brothers and sister, and also the question of exercise. I think that's, you know, it's hard. I haven't met him, so I would be happy to meet him if he came to services. Of course, he can go to any emergency services at any time to reach for help. What happens when we see cases like this is usually we start antipsychotics. They work usually pretty well, and then there's also to make sure that there's no more substances that's being used. And sometimes, in some cases, even if it's persisted for a couple of months or even sometimes more than months, it can actually leave the psychosis. So that's something that could be something very helpful. I'll give it to Nima if he has maybe something to add. You don't have anything to add? I hope that answers your question. It is a loaded question. We're very happy that you're like brave enough to come and ask it on this platform.
Yeah, and just to go further, about AMI-Quebec, like I said it there at the top, though, caregivers, we mainly deal with the family and friends of those with mental illness. So, I mean, if you have a spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, roommate, sibling, child, parent, grandparent with mental illness, that's really our focus here at AMI-Quebec. And someone in your situation dealing with a child with mental illness, we are here mainly to focus on helping you, giving you coping skills, resources to help you in your daily challenges. Because face it, being a caregiver is a 24-hour job, and that's something that there's not a lot in the community for help for caregivers, and it's something that's absolutely needed. So yeah, any more questions so far from Okay, so you were talking earlier, and you were just bringing it up now. There are a lot of studies about psychosis. Yeah, could you maybe discuss a few more?
Sure. There's a lot of studies on psychosis and cannabis. What's been kind of interesting is to see what are the different things that are at play. We're talking a lot about things today, I realize, but basically there's three things that need to be taken into consideration, and one of them is your genetic makeup. So now they're starting to see that you have to have a specific gene interaction with the environment. That means that you need to have like the use. Basically, you're using cannabis at a very high dose, high THC content, and at an early age. And you have to have certain genes that are present. So they're talking about COMT, they're talking about a whole bunch of different genes that are present within THC. If you have those two genes together, you're more at risk of developing psychosis. That's kind of starting to be a bit of the mainstream. Are we testing who has the COMT gene? No, no, we're not going to go around and test people for what it is. Maybe eventually when there's going to be a way, like, because right now it's increasing the risk. So we were talking about different levels, right? So who can use and be safe and make sure that they're in an environment that's good? I mean, that's what we have to evaluate. So that's what we're saying. So people who've had family who have schizophrenia or more at risk, that's already something that's very, very like established. So if you have family that has a psychosis and you're using a lot, think about it twice, because you'll have a way higher risk of developing psychotic symptoms. They can be transient or not. So that's why it can be difficult. The question though is, if somebody who has all those risks and doesn't use, would they also develop the psychosis? We don't know. So that's why it becomes complicated. And that's why we don't have all the answers. Well, do you have other studies that you're thinking about?
Not necessarily other studies, but the studies that we read really, they there's the young age, the high THC use, and the family history, but there's this question of whether people who already have these risks, whether they're drawn to using the THC, or whether that they're using that, or whether that's in their environment, and therefore they're more likely to use it. And I think some researchers are excited about the legalization because they feel like they'll be able to study these things, and hopefully we'll have more concrete research in the future.
Okay. My colleagues threw 30 questions at me, and I'm not going to ask you guys 30 questions.
30, wow.
Yeah, I don't know why. But no, they gave me some really good ones. I'll just find them. Okay. So, is there any link between early cannabis use, so young adults, and mental illness later in life?
We covered this a little bit. So we talked about the fact that if you do use at an early age a lot and frequently, you're more at risk of psychotic symptoms. So that can be a full-blown schizophrenia. It could be a schizophreniform disorder. It could be different psychotic elements. So I think that's one of the things that has been established. In terms of other illnesses, there's what we see in psychiatry is not perfect. I want to make sure that we understand this. What we're saying is what the studies have shown and how we understand in the worldview that we have right now. But an idea of how we frame things in terms of mental illness is this idea of comorbidity. I'm sure you've heard this in a lot of different places. If you have obesity, a comorbid condition is diabetes. The two of them are kind of linked together. If you have hypertension, a comorbid element is like the cardiovascular problem. So these are all kind of things that we see together. Which one is the cause? Which one is the effect? We're not sure. One of the things we see with cannabis use is that there's a high comorbidity with alcohol use. And so that is something to think about, because the both of them usually end up making things kind of have more disproportionate symptoms. So I think that's something that's very important to know and to think about. If you're using a lot of alcohol already, if you're worried about your alcohol intake, if you're worried if you have dependency issue, tolerance issue, craving issues, there's this very simple 4 questions that we ask ourselves usually, which is, are you waking up and wanting a drink? That means, are you waking up and wanting to smoke? Are people complaining about how you're acting if you're not smoking? Are you spending a lot of time looking for more? And are you feeling guilty about using? Okay? So these are questions that you have to ask in terms of how we can make sure that, okay, am I going into something that might be of a addiction way? So in terms of alcohol, but also in terms of cannabis. Those are the main 2 that I find are very important to know in terms of mental disorder.
Another thing to note is that if you have early use, and as we said before, with high THC content, then you can have this amotivational syndrome, where they have where people have less what the studies noted as a reward-seeking behavior. So they'll be less inclined to want to go to work or do well in school. And then how does that impact like the future? And then how does that impact your mental health? So it might not necessarily be actually the cannabis use itself, but then how the cannabis use affects the social situation. And then even if you stop the cannabis use, there's all these other things that down the road you have to think about.
Do you want to keep going, or do you want questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless there's questions around there,
Yeah.
please ask them.
Okay, here's one. Can smoking cannabis interfere with medications that you're taking for mental illness?
I don't know which ones, but I know I would say ask your pharmacist. Ask your pharmacist, because a lot of the different medications interact with each other and with the cannabis. So, and you have to make sure that also you're not smoking so much that you forget to take your medication too, which is, I believe, to be the greater problem. People smoke and then they forget to take their medication. So.
Yeah, I guess pharmacists have a harder job now. Okay, here's another one. Okay, are people with mental health problems more prone to smoking cannabis than people without mental health problems?
Tricky questions. Mental health is a big thing. Um, I'm even questioning whether or not we should be calling mental health not emotional health or spiritual health. What is mental health? I'm not going to get into this discussion because that could be left for another moment. But what we were talking about earlier is, are we seeing people who smoke more cannabis because there's something that allows them to get a certain feeling, and that same feeling is also going to be brought into what brings them to have a schizophrenia? So these are questions that we're all having. Are also the one of the things that I find very, very fascinating in terms of cannabis use is how many people are coming into our offices. So we work as psychiatrists residents, so that means we're seeing clients all the time struggling with various symptoms, and one of them is, a lot of times, the insomnia or the anxiety. And I hear it personally over and over again. I'm using because it's decreasing my anxiety. I'm using because is allowing me to sleep. When I ask them, usually, what happens if you stop, they get into this kind of like irritable symptoms and difficulty, like actually concentrating and focusing and all these things. And so it becomes very complicated to know what is the egg of what. Again, we come back to how much you're using, what type of strain you're using, know your plant, know where you're getting your stuff, and know also what are the different things that might be causing anxiety and what might be causing insomnia, and what is the underlying cause. So that's always the question. But I find it's very interesting that the kind of like, what are symptoms that people are alleviating and what maybe be paradoxical. That means what might actually be contributing. And so I always encourage patients is like, well, try to vary it. Try to see what happens if you don't. Try to see if you take it in the morning instead of taking it always at night, or try to see what happens if you go without for a week, just to make sure that your body doesn't always get used to it. And so it's like anything. We were talking about sugar, I think, last time. Like we were talking about internet addiction last time I was here. And we were making the reference to like sugar and how many people are addicted to sugar. Same thing for any kind of substances that you ingest, and maybe smoking or patch or in edibles. Just try to see if you can change up your routine and see what happens. So that's a bit of like usually the conversations I have when people are telling me, oh, is it the anxiety or is it helping me or not?
And one of the those low risk recommendations were try to smoke only once a week if you feel like you should, only once a week, and then if you want more, only on weekends. So like Sarah was saying, try to limit the use to and vary it. And I think this comes back to the idea of dependence, tolerance, and addiction.
Okay. Next question. We haven't really got into this. Medical marijuana versus, buying it on the street. Is marijuana the same as recreational marijuana in terms of its impact on the brain, nervous system, etc.?
I want to, after all this talk, I kind of want to hear what you think.
See, I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I don't know a ton about either one. Alcohol was the drug of choice in my household, so really, it's a culture I don't know a ton about. And medical marijuana, something relatively new, right? So I don't think there's a lot of information yet. Is there?
I think it's much better regulated, so you'll know what strands you're getting compared to if you're buying it out on the street or from a dealer. I think now with actual legalization, I don't know how it will compare with regards to quality, but I know with medical marijuana, people were finding that. So it does work in the same ways. Let's say if you have the same CBD to THC ratio, but with the medical marijuana, you know that's what you're getting. Whereas with the other kind, it's really your trust in this individual. And I think then that goes to the further question: do you actually trust the person who you're buying the marijuana from? So is there regulation versus no regulation?
And I think that's super important. Who do you trust? Some people trust their dealer because I saw this really funny caption. It's like these guys who are like dressed like who totally look like just like there are the people from like the Hangover movie, and they're dressed in their tuxedo with like their paper, and they're like drug dealers going for their first real job interview. And so it's this question is like, where is going to be the place of people who've been in this illegal industry for years, decades, are going to be finding their place. And what we're seeing more and more is that the people who are going into that industry don't know that much about the plant. It's kind of saying like, who's going to make decisions about cows? Is it going to be the farmers, or is it going to be like I don't know, like the politicians? It's very interesting because who has been taking care of that kind of industry has been the illegal side, and where is their place going to be? And I think that's something that I find very interesting to be thinking about. And there's no real answer to what's going to happen, because that's going to be something that they're trying to see is how much of the black market is still going to be present within the next years to come. Right now, they're thinking that it's going to be probably 60% is going to be legal, 40% are still going to go into the illegal side. And also, how much of the government is it because they want to make tax? Anyways, there's a whole bunch of discussion. But in terms of medical marijuana, one of the things that's kind of very interesting is they've started trying to do strands that, again, have higher CBD. We come back to this over and over and over again. what's your strain and what you're using is super important. And so in the medical marijuana elements is that you have those kind of strands that are more promoted and more easily accessible. What we see in the streets is that people who are using are not wanting to use the ones with the CBD increase versus the THC. They want the higher THC. So we see a THC level, as Nima was saying, that go up to 40%. That's a lot compared to the 4% that maybe was passed around in Woodstock. So we're talking about two completely different plants. And so there's a whole bunch of these elements that we have to be taking into consideration.
You're telling me that it's now 4% compared to like 2-3% in the 60s?
Well,
Yeah, so even in like 28 years ago, it was like 4%, and now it goes up to 40%, but like it's around 20% is the average. So you're talking about completely different plants and completely different uh, just highs. And if you look at the studies that were done in the 60s and the 70s, it'd be interesting to see, like, can we actually use that data? If the THC content is so much higher, people are behaving differently. And to just add on to the medical marijuana, um, an interesting point is that the accessibility is actually, it's still pretty hard. It takes a while for people to mail in the card and for them to send it back and forth. And I think some people just think it's easier to get it off the street.
Yeah, and not to mention Canada Post is on strike at the moment, so it's complicated.
and there's also one of the things that I found was fascinating is there was a few articles that have been posted in medical journals on how to kind of train first line doctors. So how to train actually GPs to be comfortable in prescribing. And that's also one of the thing that's been kind of hard is that general practitioners don't feel completely comfortable on who do they recommend to, who should be having medical marijuana, and also there's also different. We were talking about cannabinoid oils, but there's also different forms that we haven't mentioned, and that can be available and that are present a lot in the pain management sites and have seen a lot of great benefits for it. However, it's not always accessible because we haven't trained yet the people who are supposed to be prescribing it. And so that's another roadblock that's being present. And so we're seeing this plant in so many forms, in so many different avenues, and we're not completely clear on how to completely integrate it into different systems.
I got more questions. Anything from no? Okay.
One comment saying the oils and edibles are better balanced than before.
Okay. The oils and edibles are more balanced than before. Okay. Okay, here's another question from one of my colleagues whose names will remain nameless. How can parents, caregivers have a conversation with their young adult children regarding cannabis? What's the best way to have that type of conversation?
Did you see the document that I posted?
Which one?
I'm just asking Nima if he saw the document that I posted. We had a little document that we shared between the two of us and also Mark and Tony, just to have certain ideas. And there's this great document that was, I think we can give out, is how to have conversations with teens and how to be a youth ally. It's really, really cool. It's about 6 pages around, and it gives you a little bit of the framework of how to actually reflect first of what it is to be a teen. Super awesome.
Oh, the link. It's on youth.
Youth.
What was it called again?
It's how to have a conversation. Talk to your teen youth allies. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll post it, and I think it's really awesome because it gives you that idea of, okay, so first of all, the first thing I have to do is reflect on myself before I have the conversation. Think about what it was like to be a teen, what kind of things that you did because one of the things we know about teens is that there is this desire to try new things. And so I think that it gives you a whole bunch of questions to go through where you can start thinking about what's your value. Then afterwards, it brings you to a whole kind of different steps of like, okay, how do I also like make sure I understand what are my values and how I want to connect with my team. You were gonna say something? No. So I would recommend that link.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Nothing. Okay, well, don't hesitate to ask questions.
I got a bunch more, so it's fine. Okay. Do you recommend people trying pot to cope? I mean, depression was mentioned before, but what about, and actually PTSD was mentioned before. What about anxiety? Anxiety's come up a few times.
So I think depending on which ratio of THC to CBD, Sarah also mentioned that there has been reports with the higher CBD ratios that it can help with anxiety, although it hasn't been extensively researched. And I think that you also can get paranoia. So your anxiety might decrease, but your paranoia might increase as well. So it might be a trend that you don't want. I would recommend seeing how if you are smoking for anxiety, evaluating your habits, why you're doing that, how is it helping you, and perhaps trying other methods, and then speaking to your family doctor.
I mean, I'm going to say this from just two people in my life, both very similar circumstances. They both used marijuana for years, I think even daily for anxiety, and they both weaned themselves off of it on their own and found, yeah, things like diet and exercise were very helpful for them.
So I think that's what we've been kind of emphasizing is know what you're doing for which reason, and sometimes the habit is stronger than what you think, and so you have to be kind of just questioning. And so I think that's part of the conversation. It's the same conversation we have about alcohol. Just know why you're using. Are you using it because you're coming home and you want a glass of wine and you had a bad day and that's just a way of coping? Or are you using because every day you have a bad day, you drink every day and you have more than one glass, and it's the same thing for marijuana use. Know what you're using and how much you're using and and also here is which type. A glass of wine is different than half a bottle of whiskey. Nothing? Okay.
Just one comment I wanted to make. That you guys keep saying THC and CBD amounts. You should recommend people to go to the SQDC website because it does have the THC and CBD amounts in each thing that they sell.
Okay.
Oh, perfect.
Also, it has the different indica and sativa, which are the two
Great.
strains, and which ones are high THC and which ones are low. So there's a lot of information on the SQDC website.
So Tony was just making a very, very, was it from you? Yeah, Tony was making a very, very good point, and is if you go on the SQDC website, and he's going to put a link to it right in the comment box, so go on it, and it actually...
Start by saying what that stands for. Probably not everyone here is from Quebec or Montreal. So.
I don't even know.
Basically the Quebec Marijuana Association.
Yeah, yeah.
Marijuana dispensary.
Yeah, it's basically the new SAQ style for marijuana. I don't even know what SAQ stands for, so yeah. Anyways, so basically, if you go on it, they're having the same ways of so when you what
Société Québécoise du Cannabis.
oh Société Québécoise du Cannabis. So if you go on their website, they're doing a bit of the similar thing that we've been kind of saying. When you go to the SAC, Société des Alcools du Québec, you basically arrive and you have wine and you have spirits. And when you go to the wine section, you know that around what percentage-wise is maybe, I don't know, 8 to 12%. And if you go to the spirit or alcohol, like hard alcohol section, you know it's around 40%. you're gonna choose different things depending on what you want for that night. Like if you, it's gonna be part of your decision making. Same thing when you go to get your cannabis products. You want to go and see, am I looking for the more high element, or am I looking for the more like relaxing, pain relieving element? So I think that's going to be very important to make that decisions, and to also know, because of all the discussion we've had about the different risks. So to think about these questions, am I at a higher risk right now of certain elements? So we've talked about impaired driving. Are you well, I mean, teens won't be able to go there, unfortunately, but I'm sure they'll be very smart to find fake IDs or friends to go. So I just, but think about it. If you are also have family members and of who have substance use disorder, of who have schizophrenia, and at, and if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, so these are the things that you need to be making sure of.
Okay, yeah, and as Tony mentioned, you know, the dispensary has all this information about the specific strains and the percentage of TBC and CBD in each strain. So, and it's probably on their website too. So I've got more questions. Is there any research on the long-term side effects of cannabis use? Yeah.
I think there was an 8-year study that showed that if you have, it's the recurring theme of the. There was one study I read that if you have the short psychotic episode, so individuals who are intoxicated with cannabis, they can have the hallucinations and the paranoia, and the impaired judgment. And in some individuals, that can last for a longer period of time, past the 15 minutes to 5 hours. And in those individuals, many of them don't seek help, but those who do, 50% of them, 50% who seek help at the end of 8 years develop schizophrenia. So I think that was one of the longer studies, and it's again this increased risk of psychosis with earlier high THC use of cannabis.
It's a more general question. We've talked so much about the negative effects, and we haven't really talked a lot on positive effects. I know we talked about pain relief, but what else? What else positive can it do?
Well, it can give you euphoria. I think we need to be honest about the positive effects, of course, because we wouldn't have this discussion if there was no positive effect. People would just, you know, people don't go eating poisonous mushrooms just for fun and legalizing it, or I hope they don't. I think that's a very good point, is people do feel very good when they use it. There's also this idea of having more time with creative projects and feeling more creative. That's something that's been brought up a lot. Those are things that are also the relaxing part, where there's a bit of a disconnect with the reality. So it gives a bit of space for people to take a bit of a step back in order of preference in terms of their daily life. And I think that's something that also is also very beneficial.
I also think, like alcohol, there's a really important social aspect that it's not that we don't talk about it. It's, I think, just more assumed. And it's like people who have a difficult time stopping cigarette smoking, nicotine, because of the social aspect. Everyone who they're around smokes, and there's this, they like the aspect of smoking. We see that in cannabis too. People like actually smoking the drug. They like the effect that it can have when they hang out with their friends.
No, I didn't have any more questions, but I'm sure there's more things we haven't brought up.
Yeah, Yeah, well, I'm just curious in terms of the benefits that we're talking about, because we're talking about the immediate benefit of specific, like short-term intoxication. Intoxication is just basically what we had talked about, that are the symptoms that you have and that we categorize in the DSM, but basically when you're high, what happens. And there were great studies on people who have multiple sclerosis. And that's been quite known and shown that it actually reduces the amount of spasm that people can have. So, multiple sclerosis, you have a lot of muscles that end up spazzing, and it releases that kind of spastic activity. So, I think that's something that's also very beneficial for certain people who have that illness. In terms of, we talked a little bit about cancer patients and side effects of chemotherapy. It actually reduces nausea in that population. It reduces nausea, reduces vomiting, and increases appetite, which is great because usually cancer patients do not like to eat. So that's also something that's been very, very beneficial. In Parkinsonism and Parkinson, it reduces the amount of tremor. So that's also something that's quite interesting. So people who have Parkinson usually end up developing this like very soft tremor. Well, it's a resting tremor. So, but it's so that's also been shown to also reduce the amount of tremors. So these are the kind of very specific population-based the studies. We come back to it, but I want to make sure we do it here, is because we're talking about mental illness, and there's been a lot of difficulty of doing studies in mentally ill patients because of the risk that has been associated with schizophrenia. So it becomes very complicated to actually do studies on populations that already have another comorbid condition. So that's why I don't think we're going to see that much progress in that sense of like whether or not there's a benefit or a risk because of that already proven effect. So it's kind of saying, what do we can't know the effect of alcohol on babies. What's the safe? We don't actually know what the safe use of alcohol when pregnancy. We just know that there's an effect. We just don't know the cutoff. So that's why it's become kind of difficult to do these studies, is because we have to be careful. We can't just give and know that there might be some higher risk that we know that are present.
I don't have any more questions. Anything? No? Do you have anything you want? I mean, you sent me 9 pages of documents to read, so there's got to be stuff on there.
Let me check. We do want to come prepared.
Of course.
I have them.
Yeah. I'll just tell one anecdote. There's a coach in the National Basketball Association who had severe back problems for 2 years of several surgeries, and he had a conference because he was away from the game for a long time. He said, "I'm using medical marijuana now, and it's been a lifesaver for me, and my players aren't allowed to touch it." And that's the environment we kind of live in right now. Like I said, things are slowly changing, and I think 5 and 10 years now we're going to have some very completely different conversations about how this is going to be used by the general public. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm taking my little document and I'm completely addicted to my phone, so do not judge me. I try not to judge you. But it's very useful. One of the things that's been coming up is recommendations. There's going to be a lot of recommendations. They love recommendations. Different society loves to recommend and say what they think. So I'm just going to read them to you. But one of the things is the use of synthetic cannabis. We haven't talked about it too much. We did mention it quickly in the passing before. You know it by the street names of K2 or Spice. It's hard. It's really, really hard because we have different very well-known studies that show that there is a risk of seizures. There's a risk of different arrhythmia, so heart problems. We don't know exactly how much there is or what exactly it does or how it can link. Basically, what happens when the cannabis comes into your brain, it links and eventually it goes out. We don't know how long it stays. It can stay in your system for a very long time. So try to avoid those ones. there's a lot of different strands that you can try, and if there is things that you feel like you'll keep progressing, maybe try to see someone who can help you in order to do that, but try to avoid that those words. Were you gonna say something about?
I think that hallucination.
Oh yeah,
With synthetic cannabis, you have like a much higher probability of having this hallucinations, so the visual and the tactile hallucinations. And I've seen people who've had it, and it can last for quite a while. Definitely longer than the 5 hours, up to a week.
a week.
I've seen people who even after a week they were still high, and they were having hallucinations, and it was the synthetic cannabis.
Okay, so let me continue scrolling to my 9 pages document. We did want to come prepare and make sure we have like all the. Okay. Um, okay, so one of the big things that is coming back and back again is the adolescent population. That is something that is mostly very, very touchy subject. Also, we talked about your brain in adolescence basically changes a lot. It creates pathways. That means what you're using. I love one of my favorite metaphor is like a baseball player. You know, a baseball player repeats over and over that gesture. Well, I mean the thrower. I don't know how the pitch. I should I should refine my metaphor. But the pitcher basically knows how to throw the ball and does it 1,000 times, 2,000 times, 5,000 times. That connectivity and that reactivity in their brain is wired. They know exactly what to do. When you're using cannabis at a very low age, that means 12, 11, 10, and you use a whole lot, that means multiple times a day, repetitively, high THC strands, what's been present is there is alteration in your brain. Images clearly show there's something that doesn't connect the same way. You're not using the same track, you're slower, you're inattentive, you're making bad decisions, and that is also increased if there's a use of alcohol. The good news is it doesn't stay. And I think I had mentioned it before. It doesn't stay. It doesn't have a long-term effect yet. But the thing is that what happens if, again, it's continuously used? That means it's going to stay if you continue to use it throughout your life. So I think that those are the things that are important to note. Oh yeah, when should you come to the ER? When are you worried about maybe your intoxication?
Well, obviously, when you can't control your bodily functions, and a sense of paranoia. Um, yeah, heart palpitations, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you pretty much, if if you are feeling, I think it just as a general rule, if you're feeling at risk for anything or if you're worried, you should go to the emergency department. I would never think anyone would fault you for going if you're worried. Um, one of the things we didn't talk about with regards to the breastfeeding and the pregnancy is I think there was also a recommendation about fertility, that if you're trying to get pregnant, it can reduce your fertility. So it's something to, because some individuals, they might.
With the man as well.
I think I only read in women. But if you're trying to get pregnant and you think I'll stop when I'm pregnant, it reduces your fertility.
So I scrolled through those 9 pages. I think we've covered pretty much all the points that I felt were important. You've got some resources that we're going to put up. We also are going to give you the links to the different sites and documents that we had mentioned. I'll also try to see if there is any research that's being done within Montreal and get back to you and see how we can maybe connect you with different things. That could be my pager. I am not on call, so I'm not going to answer.
Live video. You can check it. Nima, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think we've talked about pretty much a lot of the different aspects. I think one of the documents that I was looking at with Sarah, was if you, just like anything else, like alcohol, if you want to know your risks so that you're using in an informed way. The only way to not be at risk is if you don't use. That perhaps is unrealistic. So if you want to use, know the risks so that you're well informed.
Yeah, I think just closing remarks. It's very interesting that I'm very happy we're having this discussion. I'm very grateful for Mark and Tony to have invited us because marijuana is a plant that has a lot of benefits. It can be used in many different ways. You can learn to do it. Unfortunately, they're not allowing people to grow it, which I find is unfortunate because I feel if people are more connected to plants, they might have a better understanding of what's going on. That's, however, not the case right now. Maybe it will change. So you're not allowed to grow it in your house. Yeah. Yeah.
In Ontario, you can have 4 plants.
Oh, in Ontario, you can have 4 plants. For the people of Ontario listening to us. But yeah, in Quebec, you cannot grow at this moment. I think it's all about education, knowing what you're using and knowing who you are. Those are the kind of basic that in any kind of mental health stuff we look on, but excitingly, especially as we're lifting this prohibition on cannabis.
Yeah, it's exciting times. So looking like we have nothing left coming from the audience, so I'm going to wrap up. So yeah, I want to thank you, Nima and Sarah, for being with us tonight. A little bit more about AMI-Quebec. So we're a grassroots organization that helps families manage the effects of mental illness through support, education, guidance, and advocacy. We have workshops, support groups, and one-on-one counseling. Most of our services are free. If you'd like to know more about AMI-Quebec, you can reach us at 514-486-1448 or on our website at www.amiquebec.org. We'd like to know what you thought about the workshop tonight, so please fill out the survey. We'll put a link up to it at the end of the video, and let us know how the video was. You'd like to see in the future, what was good, what was bad, what was ugly. It all helps us to improve things down the road, and that's how we do things around here. A few upcoming events at AMI-Quebec, all in November. So we have a creative expression workshop, which is basically a form of art therapy on November 1st. Then on November 14th, we have an introduction to borderline personality disorder workshop, also known as BPD. And then on November 21st, we have, Sarah might be back for this. It's going to be also with the McGill residents on types of mental illness. It'll be in person, not Facebook, but actually in person, where you come to the workshop yourself and talk to doctors in person and ask questions about types of mental illness, and that's on November 21st. All of this info is on our website, amiquebec.org. And yes, thank you for being with us tonight. And yeah, educate and inform yourself on marijuana and mental illness. And I will slap this board no further. Thanks for being with us tonight. See you soon.